Okay, thank you very much. I mean, my intervention will be extremely short. I would like to comment on Mark Tam's presentation. I'm very grateful to him. I learned a lot, but I am perplexed. I'm perplexed. First of all, I would say that the games he shared with us, from an intellectual point of view, they are non-existent. Their intellectual content is zero. They are not a threat to historians, but from a political point of view, they are really dangerous. And so they have to be looked at very carefully. That's the reason why I'm grateful to Marek. Why are they politically dangerous? Well, I think that the immersive quality makes them sort of addictive experience. And so we can imagine a society in which this kind of games would spread, not to everybody. Somebody would control those games. So you can imagine which kind of nightmare. Many years ago, I wrote an essay on Hobbes' Leviathan, and at the very end, I made a comment imagining a society in which, let's say, the pollution of the atmosphere would be so dreadful that in order to survive, the human species would need a superpower, much more powerful than Hobbes' Leviathan. Now, we can imagine something similar about, let's say, a poison spreading in society, that kind of immersive experience, which would be addictive and which would erase the difference between fiction and reality. So, as I said, I'm an historian, I'm an old-fashioned historian, and I don't feel threatened intellectually by that kind of historicity, not at all. But as a human being, I feel threatened by the possibility of such a future. So the problem is, which kind of attitude should we take, not only as historians, but as human beings, vis-a-vis this kind of phenomena? And I think that, first of all, I would stress distance. I'm very fond of distance. And I think that distance is not obvious. That's the reason why some years ago, I insisted on the cognitive role of estrangement in order to create a distance, even when we seem to be familiar with culture, a person, an event. And then I came across a wonderful passage in Proust, La Recherche, when Saint-Loup, at the end of the cycle, says, "La guerre n'est pas stratégique." So I think that we have to take a distance vis-a-vis those phenomena. And we have to look at them, certainly starting from a description, but the description is insufficient. Then we have to make a judgment. And as I said, I would like to insist on distance vis-a-vis immersion. And I had a conversation with Marek yesterday about that word reenactment, which he used in his presentation. Because I wrote an essay which has been now, published. I translated it into Italian. It's included in my latest book, La lettera uccide. And I focused, the essay is called Microstoria e storia del mondo. and I focused on reenactment. I tried to suggest a trajectory which was not based on, it was not hypothetical. It's a direct series of connections from Hobbes to Vico to Marx, Labriola, Gentile, Croce, Collingwood. And this trajectory is based on the idea of mental experiments, as if. And at the end of this trajectory, Collingwood spoke about reenactment. Now, he took this idea, I argued, from Gentile. Collingwood was very much influenced by Italian idealism. And then he took, I mean, he was perplexed by Gentile's political choices, of course. But I mean, Gentile, as you know, probably, I mean, argued that history, res gestae, do not exist except when we reenact them. So he looked at Croce as, let's say, sort of positivist, a disguised positivist. Now, this idea, Gentile's idea, is, in my view, absolutely crazy. If you think about, let's say, a Mendeleev table of philosophers, you have a niche for Gentile, but that's it. It's really crazy. But Collingwood's idea of reenactment did not imply that we live through our experience, mental experience in the past. It's a kind of as if experiment. And I think that's the crucial distinction. Reenactment is crucial for historians because we have to make hypotheses, we have to work with as ifs, but they are, let's say, something different from being immersed. They imply distance, they imply a sort of artificial attitude vis-a-vis reality, which is exactly the difference from, let's say, being immersed in a world which is completely fictional and we are unable to control. Thank you very much.
Marek, maybe it's good that you reply a little bit. What do you think about it? You want to reply, Marek?
I'm not intellectually capable of something
Okay.
very profound, but we already had our discussion during the break, and probably we are very much on the same page.
Okay, so you don't want to reply in public. Okay, so let's start with our last section for this workshop. The next intervention will be online because Paolo Martinelli will now work for our Prime Minister. He's in Rome. Paolo is a PhD student. He's been already a PhD student here in Bologna. He's working since the very beginning on media literacy, on learning disorders, on digitalization, digital competence, digital citizenships, and all that. So is also working in the social field, in the field of open education, and he's the president of cooperativa that's called Archilabo. And so he's working, but he's mainly a semiotician, so he also in the PhD thesis is trying to keep together all these perspectives that and all the work that he's done during these years. Today he's working on art in the era of non-fungible token, which is a really interesting topic. We heard about it in the last weeks also in Italy. So thanks, Paolo, for being here, and you have 30 minutes for your presentation.
Thanks, Claudio, and thanks to everyone for being here. It's my first time in the Sala Rossa, and I'm very honored. In this short presentation, I will try to show how the so-called NFT phenomenon is of utmost interest for a semiotics of art, or at least for a semiotics of digital art. As we shall see, what is at stake here concerns some key concepts of artistic production, such as that of the authenticity and uniqueness. In the second part, using born digital manuscripts as an example, particular attention will be devoted to NFT as possible players in the preservation of digital cultural heritage collections. Before moving forward, and in order to establish our theoretical framework, I think it would be relevant to provide a short description of what non-fungible tokens are and their role as an emerging technology. As far as digital technologies are concerned, this will be the only slightly technical subject I will address. A non-fungible token is a financial security or a certificate consisting of digital data stored in a blockchain, a form of distributed ledger, a register. The ownership of an NFT is recorded in the blockchain and can be transferred by the owner, allowing NFTs to be sold and traded. NFTs typically contain references to digital files, such as photos, video, and audio. NFT is uniquely identifiable, and its market value is associated with the digital file it references. Over the past 2 years, we have heard about many sensational events involving art and NFT. Perhaps the most talked about case was that of the work Every Days, the first 5,000 days, a collage of 5,000 pictures that artist Mike Winkelmann, better known as Beeple, started composing every day since 2007. The NFT associated with this work of digital art was put up for auction at Christie's on February 25 and sold for $79 million. Besides being the third most expensive piece of art ever sold by a living artist, the collage is notable because it is attached to a non-fungible token and has no physical presence. In fact, the artwork itself is available for viewing free of charge across the internet. What Christie's actually auctioned off is a one-of-a-kind cryptographic token that acts as a sort of certificate of ownership for the collage, which can in turn be sold to someone else in the future. The buyer also received a digital file of the artwork and some rights to display the image, but the copyright wasn't part of the transaction. Sorry, Claudio, can you turn off the mic, please? Thank you. While the whole Every Day is the first 5,000 days story caused a stir for the transcendent dimension of the economic speculation attached to it, which currently characterizes the entire narrative on the NFT phenomenon. Here we are mainly interested in understanding what has happened in the immanent dimension. The aim is to understand how a digital work that is perfectly identical to all its reproductions, which can be retrieved for free online, can be intended as a unique and authentic work. It can be argued that this is also an economic issue, at least to the extent that Ferdinand de Saussure built his semiotic theory on the economic principle of value. Saussure explains the concept of linguistic or semiotic value through the famous example of the 5-franc coin. It is useful to consider that the act of producing an NFT is indicated by the verb to mint. Indeed, the technology through the minting of NFT is precisely the same used to coin cryptocurrency. I believe then that the Saussure example can help us understand what happens for a digital work to acquire a different value from all its reproductions, even if they are perfectly identical. According to Saussure, even outside language, all values are apparently governed by the same paradoxical principle. They are always composed of a dissimilar thing that can be exchanged for the thing of which the value is to be determined, and of similar things that can be compared with the thing of which the value is to be determined. Both factors are necessary for the existence of a value. To determine what a 5-franc piece is worth, one must therefore know that it can be exchanged for a fixed quantity of a different thing, for example, bread, and that it can be compared with a similar value of the same system, for example, a 1-franc piece. In the light of this clear definition, considering the case of the NFT of Beeple's work, the first dimension of value associated with it, the transcendent one, is very clear and is identified by the figure auctioned at Christie's. It is less easy and more interesting to understand what change has taken place in the immanent dimension, which we can think of as consisting of all the digital occurrences of Beeple's work perfectly identical to it. It is important to know that in economics, the second dimension of value described by Saussure goes under the name of fungibility. In economics, fungibility is the property of a good or a commodity whose individual units are essentially interchangeable and each of whose part is indistinguishable from another part. Fungible tokens are the ones that can be exchanged or replaced. For example, a 10 euros note can easily be exchanged with 10 1 euro coins. In contrast, non-fungible tokens cannot be exchanged in the same manner. For example, gold is fungible since a specified amount of pure gold is equivalent to that same amount of pure gold, whether in the form of coins, ingots, or in other states. But a unique item such as gold fashioned into a statue by a famous artist would not be considered fungible. Fungibility refers only to the equivalence and indistinguishability of each unit of a commodity with other units of the same commodity, and not to the exchange of one commodity for another. The transcendent dimension of the value in the economic sense of a fungible good depends on the scarcity of that good. The value of a government-issued currency, such as the dollar, is sensitive to the quantity of banknotes that are printed. If the government were to make an unlimited amount of banknotes available to all the citizens, they would completely lose their value. We can say that digital contents are naturally fungible. They tend to replicate identical to themselves the moment they are created, even before human agentiveness by computer backup. But a special feature of them is that there is no central bank to regulate their inflation or deflation. This applies to all kinds of files, audio files, movies, photos, and of course, digital art. It has been the great revolution that digital tools have brought to the cultural industry. Reproducibility and openness, free access to culture, but also the failure of the traditional economy of cultural products. Beyond the ethical and the economic aspects of this phenomenon, we have seen many attempts to curb the reproducibility of digital content. Scarcity has been reinvented precisely to prevent the transcendent dimension of value from tending to zero. For instance, technologies such as DRM, digital right management, were born to prevent the uncontrolled diffusion of digital books. If you try to borrow a digital copy of The Name of the Rose in the online archive of Biblioteca Sala Borsa to read it on your ebook reader, you may hear from the librarian that the text has already been lent to another reader and that you can put yourself on the waiting list. It sounds strange, and it is strange precisely because it transgresses a native rule of digital content. Similarly, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music have locked files in a format that does not allow my son to send a compilation to his friend, as was the case 20 years ago with peer-to-peer technologies. To tell the truth, the phenomenon of the economic devaluation of these cultural products has only been partially stemmed. Suffice it to say that the cost of a single compact disc is roughly equivalent to an annual subscription on Spotify. A monthly subscription to Netflix costs the same as a single Blu-ray DVD, and the paper book is worth the entire subscription to Kindle Unlimited. Now, one might be tempted to think of non-fungible token as yet another attempt to curb digital reproducibility. However, with respect to these cultural contents, work of art have their own spatial status. The value dimension of works of art produced in the form of digital content is not commensurable with that of other cultural products that are digitized. Digital art has nothing to do with this phenomenon of transition between different markets because it is natively fungible. Since its origin, it has always been impossible to distinguish an original digital work of art from its reproduction. We can say that with the introduction of non-fungible tokens, the intention is not to give up the opportunity provided by digital technologies to disseminate the work of art through its reproductions. But at the same time, the idea is to do so by uniquely certifying and making the original recognizable. Does it make sense? The seemingly incomprehensible stories about the value of non-fungible tokens at least seem to prove that in the case of a work of art, it is possible to admit the maximum degree of reproducibility of a digital content and at the same time bring the scarcity down to the only conceivable number for a work of art, which is the number 1. On closer inspection, it is the widely discussed topic of the relationship between a work of art and its reproductions. Let us see how the phenomenon of non-fungible tokens can play a role in this relationship. Almost 100 years before any blockchain or cryptocurrency or even digital contents in the famous work, the work of art in the age of its technological reproduction, one of the earliest examples of technological reproduction, mechanical reproduction, obviously, considered by Benjamin is precisely the ability of the ancient Greeks to mint coins. Benjamin emphasizes that art has always had a certain degree of reproducibility, but the technological reproduction of the work of art is something else, which has different consequences for the status of the original. While the authentic retains its full authority in the face of manual reproduction, which is usually branded as a forgery, this is not the case with technical reproduction. In even the most perfect manual reproduction, one thing is lacking: the here and now of the work of art, its unique existence in a particular place. The here and now of the original work constitutes the concept of its authenticity. Differently, in Benjamin's view, as a result of processes of technical reproduction, a supremely sensitive core in the art object is affected, that is genuineness, authenticity. Technical reproduction, Benjamin indicates, results in the devaluation of the iket nunc. The example that leads Benjamin to this conclusion is that of the xylograph, that is woodcut. But today, to its extreme consequences, it describes well the native devaluation of digital content and digital artworks in particular. Benjamin does not use the term fungibility, but in light of the above, we can understand that the technical reproducibility introduced by a technological innovation has the power to make the coins of the Greeks and the medieval Madonna xylographies fungible. But precisely, what is this iket nunc, this here and now of the work of art that is endangered by technical reproducibility? Benjamin says that what shrinks in an age where the work of art can be produced by technological means is its quintessence or its aura. Both of these words are threatening to any kind of semiotic theory because they seem to indicate something ineffable or unknowable. However, the author hastens to specify the two precise areas that unambiguously describe what is at stake. The unique existence, aura, and quintessence of a work of art are given by the changes it has undergone in its physical structure over the course of time and the fluctuating conditions of ownership through which it may have passed. Both of these conditions make a work of art a non-fungible object, and both of these aspects come to an end the moment a technological innovation allows perfect technical reproducibility. It is important to dwell on both these conditions. It is remarkable that in the first condition, we find neither the author grappling with a creative passion nor the symbolic meaning of the work of art. What we find is merely the physical structure of the work of art. We then discover that the problem of the authenticity and uniqueness of the work of art has to do with what Umberto Eco called the material arrangement of the sign. In a theory of semiotics, the theory of modes of sign production refers to the activity of material production of a signal. The signal is not precisely a semiotic object. Eco specifies, however, that if one speaks of work carried out on the expressive continuum to physically produce signals still lacking semiotic functions, or to select them from pre-existing entities, it is because these products and selections may then constitute the plane of expression of a sign function, and thus their mode of physical production is of interest to semiotics. For Benjamin, the technical reproduction of the work of art is in the first instance a mode of production that has its own destructive and cathartic aspect. And I quote, the liquidation of the traditional value of the cultural heritage. For the author, this consideration certainly has ethical and social implications and is prognostic in relation to what we now call mass culture. But what emerges strongly from Benjamin's work is that the value of art does not immediately have to do with the contents and meaning of a work or with its author, but first and foremost with its modes of production in the same sense as understood by Umberto Eco. The Marxist reference to the theory of modes of production is, after all, explicit and occupies the entire premise of Benjamin's work. The here and now of the act of production thus envisages a material autonomy of the sign, and in the case of digital contents, a material agency oriented towards the uncontrolled reproduction of the identical. In this respect, the non-fungible tokens do not represent an attempt to hinder the dissemination of a digital work of art, but to identify and distinguish the here and now of a digital file from all its subsequent copies. In the second condition, the fluctuating condition of ownership through which the work of art may have passed, it is impossible not to see a relationship with blockchain technology. NFTs only exist within a blockchain, which is a public register of all the ownership changes of the NFT itself. The blockchain is based on peer-to-peer technology. There is no central control of the register. And as we have said, the writing of a transfer of ownership can only be authorized by the owner of the NFT. We can say that the function of the blockchain is precisely to certify the fluctuating conditions of ownership through which the work of art is going to pass. The blockchain thus stands as a candidate to guarantee this second requirement that digital reproducibility had neutralized. While the idea of putting an end to digital reproducibility in terms of the dissemination of identical files still sounds strange, it is the opinion of many that the ability for an electronic token with individual properties to reflect independent value over another digit entity to signify its rareness will reshape the internet in its totality. There would be many examples to present on the non-speculative uses of NFT. Institutions and organizations are experimenting with NFTs for the preservation of cultural heritage. Museums organize NFT exhibitions, or NFTs are linked to physical works to be exhibited in the so-called metaverse, Web 3.0. The Uffizi Gallery in Florence is turning some of its most prized artworks into NFTs and selling them to raise funds. For example, an encrypted Michelangelo painting of the Holy Family, the famous Tondodoni, just sold for 140,000 euros. But to conclude, I would like to talk about a possible application of non-fungible tokens for the preservation of so-called born digital manuscripts. As readers, we often talk about the different reading experience on analog media, an example, the book proper, or on digital media, e-readers, tablets, and desktops. However, we no longer talk about the modes of production of these texts, the differences in the production of text through analog or digital devices. We did not talk about it anymore because we can say with a good degree of approximation that 99% of the acts of production, be it academic, literary, or epistolary, take place in a digital environment. There was obviously a period of transition. A story I attribute to Umberto Eco tells how in the 1990s, some authors used to type copy their own already published books in order to be able to sell a manuscript that had in fact never existed because it was originally written through a digital device. Of course, these were fake manuscripts produced by the author of the work himself. The distinction between manual reproducibility and technical reproducibility introduced by Benjamin here shakes the very idea of the existence of a manuscript traditionally understood as any document written by hand or typewritten, as opposed to mechanically printed or reproduced in some indirect or automated way. What we can understand as a manuscript of a natively digital work is probably saved on some memory device. It is a born digital manuscript and has no less need of preservation than a manuscript proper. And we can bet that it will be lost. That of manuscripts, after all, is always a story of loss or destruction. The first manuscript, the copy of Benjamin's book that I used to prepare this talk is the result of editorial work on 3 handwritten drafts. The first manuscript is in German and contains the introductory paragraph on Marxist modes of production, which was deleted from the second. 2 typewritten copies were prepared from the first manuscript, which Benjamin sent to Max Horkheimer and Bernhard Reich in 1936. In 1972, the typewritten copies were believed to have been lost, and it was not possible to explain the differences between the original manuscript and the French version published 36 years earlier. The French version was enriched with an apparatus of notes that did not appear in the original manuscript, among them an in-depth study of woodcuts, xylography. The second draft is typewritten and has 7 more pages than the 54 of the first draft, but on the first page of the typescript, there are annotations whose handwriting does not correspond to that of the author, which initially led one to think of a purely editorial work, not without political purposes. Marx had disappeared completely in this version. Benjamin began writing a third version of the essay after receiving a letter with some suggestion from Adorno. The manuscript was sent to Gretel Adorno, who made 3 copies. These copies have both Benjamin's revision and a series of annotations and corrections in an handwriting that does not match that of the author. It is impossible to compare them with the original third manuscript because it has been lost. In the light of a story like this, we must then ask ourselves whether we are willing to accept living in an age in which, as Benjamin predicted, the native technical reproducibility of digital technologies has undermined the very status of the manuscript to the point of its complete disappearance. For along with the disappearance of manuscripts, we should also be willing to accept the disappearance of their documentary value. If, on the other hand, we decide that manuscripts still exist in the form of born digital manuscripts, those involved in cultural heritage and the digital humanities should feel a duty to make every effort to continue preserving them. Sorry. This should happen, as with manuscripts proper and works of art, starting from their material support. For a moment, we thought that in the field of cultural heritage preservation, digital innovation would help to preserve the decay of vegetal memory, as Umberto Eco recounts in his book, The Vegetal Memory. The future of books towards the middle of the last century, in fact, a tragic phenomenon occurred. Books were no longer produced with rag paper, and people started to use wooden paper, which has a maximum life of 70 years before crumbling. Now, already accessing a file saved on digital media 20 years ago could be no small problem. But even assuming that a digital device allows us to preserve the memory of text that no longer exist on paper, the risk is that we will have to search for them in an unindexed library of Babel, where, moreover, due to their native technical reproducibility, they have lost their status as manuscripts. They are indistinguishable from forgeries and counterfeits. 2 years ago, I received an email in which a semiotics professor asked me to read and comment on a version of his book that was still in draft form. I imagine this has happened to many of you. I felt very honored, not only because I value his work, but because already by the end of the first chapter, I thought that book was an important book and would be translated into many languages, probably in a version quite different from that first draft. I knew I was holding something important in my hands, but I also knew that the digital copy would never enjoy its manuscript status precisely because of its digital nativity. After sending him my comments, I printed out that file, including the text of the email to which it was attached, and placed everything in a folder with the intention of somehow saving the value of that digital born manuscript. It will be difficult to establish for posterity whether that manuscript is not a forgery, and it will be an almost metaphysical problem to decide whether that bundle of paper is a unique object. Today, I'm convinced that the minting of NFTs represents a potential solution to this kind of problem. From a semiotic point of view, NFTs could allow us to revise our idea of value with respect to the authenticity and uniqueness of an object that by nature tends to autonomously reproduce itself. We have many misgivings about blockchain and NFT that come from stories of economic speculation. But I believe that we should not stop considering this digital innovation as a possible tool for studying and preserving cultural heritage. Thank you. I can't hear you, Claudio, sorry.
Thank you very much, Paolo, for your presentation. So we switch to the last of our thoughts for today. Here we have Federico. Federico Bellentani is the perfect embodiment of the relationships between Bologna and Estonia, because he graduated here in semiotics and then moved to for having his PhD to Estonia. He worked on also, Federico works on the specialist on these topics. His books by the Reuter is on the meaning of the built environment. But since the PhD thesis, he started working on this kind of cultural heritage, memory, and digital stuff also. So now he's a postdoc. He has a postdoc position at the University of Turin with our colleague and friend Massimo Leone. So Federico, it's up to you, 30 minutes, and then we can discuss a little bit.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm really honored to be here today with a lot of mentors, friends, and colleagues from Bologna, from Estonia, and from all over the world. Today, I would like to give a talk on presenting an interdisciplinary approach to digital memorial practices. It's a few first ideas that are going to in fact, impact some research and some publication that will come out in the future. So those are some first ideas that I would like to share with you in order to collect also your feedback. I would like to start from a trivial category, let's say, that when we speak about the digitalization of cultural heritage, we always speak about two different processes, one that is institutional and one that is individual. As today in the different presentation, we see many examples and cases of individual digitalization and practices in the digital sphere. On the other hand, research tend to actually concentrate on the first. So on the more institutional point of view, when there is actually an author that 90% of the time is actually a governmental or an education institution that aim to digitalize the cultural heritage. On the other hand, we know very well, also from our experience, that there's also an individual or a family, if you want, part of it, which include indeed the digitalization of our own cultural artifacts at the individual level. When we speak about the institutional point of view, the general aim is to protect, restore, investigate, disseminate, and promote tangible and intangible cultural assets coming from all types of cultural institutions. And our prototypical image of this would be so far a platform for digital cultural heritage, virtual museum, digital archives. Europe has spent a lot of resources on this, on the digitalization of the cultural heritage. There are a plethora of different research groups and projects dealing with the digital cultural heritage. And as Europe, of course, this impact also on the national level, on the local level, always speaking about the institutional level. And in this case, when analyzing, let's say, the narrative that are behind this project, it seems there are two main objectives behind these projects. On the one hand, the digital preservation, so making cultural asset available for the next generation, fighting against the natural or the human-derived threats. On the other hand, there's also an idea of easing the access. So in a narrative where yesterday only people that have got time and resources to actually access cultural heritage can indeed access cultural asset and heritage, the digital would somehow provide a platform where everyone can access and make it available for everyone. This is in normal times, but also in times where, you know, it's less easy actually to access cultural heritage, like in times of a pandemic, for example. The narratives related to this project always often address a specific target, which is the young generation. So the idea is to capture the imagination of younger digital native Europeans as the digitalized cultural heritage is really passing through a certain kind of knowledge from the past to a next generation throughout the media channels and practices that the young generation is supposed to actually assess better than the generation before, with all the obviously ethical and commercial risks that somehow these imply. But as said, this is not only the digitalization of cultural heritage works also at the individual dimension. This is a picture from my grandfather table. So this was this tool, which is a tool to digitalize pre-digital picture, diapositive, I don't remember the name in English, but okay. It was actually a present from his son, among which there's my father, which was done possibly because they didn't know what to give to their father over Christmas, and actually became one of the most important project of digitalization of family cultural heritage at least in the province of Bologna, or at least in Pianoro. And in this kind of sense, it's interesting because my grandfather is working on that constantly, unfortunately also overnight, and unfortunately also forcing his caregivers to actually do that in a very interesting and intercultural attempt to digitalize is cultural assets. So we're speaking about actually thousands of pre-digital picture in order for me to access it later. And this is actually very, very interesting. So we see also that, you know, the growing availability, of course, of technologies such as smartphone apps and scanners and so on and so forth, really demonstrate the need of the individual or of the family to pass at least the material cultural heritage to the next generation. So after this very brief idea of the main narratives behind the institutional and individual approaches to the digitalization of cultural heritage, I pose it as a question because I also was part of some project related to this topic, and I wonder if we are still in a sort of transition, right? So I also have 34 years old, and I was one of the last generation that actually, you know, used to go out without a smartphone, without using Google Maps, and so on and so forth. So I wonder if actually my approach to that so far has been actually somehow traditional and conservative. Somehow, if we are in this transition that before Marek Tam was actually referring to, if we are still very much on the digitization of the cultural heritage without really exploring the datification, the algorithmization, the platformization of it. So in this kind of way, for sure, our initiative and our projects has somehow cope with the creating initiative for digitalize and making available the cultural heritage to the next generation. Somehow they managed to enhance research and cross-sector cooperation between ECD companies, cultural heritage, and users. Today I'm also working in an ICT company as a head of marketing and communication, and surely I'm involved in certain kind of project like that. And I can say that the first 2 points are somehow addressed in the project today. But what about you know, the history as a participation, right? What about the social aspect of it? What about the fostering the citizen engagement and innovative use, this human or more than human approach that we claim in our sort of human washing communication, but then later we do technology a bit traditional that does not include necessarily or overall the user in our design. So the idea, and this is really first idea that I share with you for the first time today, is the reengineering the role of cultural heritage. And for me, the idea is to create an interdisciplinary approach to address the digitalization of the cultural and material heritage in particular, that looks at how people make sense of it, how they generate meanings, and how engage with it through a myriad of different practices. So meaning making and practices, of course, from my point of view, semiotics is at the core of this interdisciplinary approach. When we speak about cultural and material heritage, then we speak also of the kind of cultural and material spaces the heritage creates. So that's why also I call for the use of cultural geography and cultural geography theories. And also we need to have a certain kind of background on ECT. Of course, I'm not calling for the semiotician or scholars in humanities to be proficient in Java or Python, but on the other hand, of course, we need somehow to have the skill to speak that language in order to interact, to be an interface between research, business, institution, and technology team. Sorry for, it's not really the real, the good word, but, in order to provide a solution aiming at reengineering the cultural heritage. For me, at the moment, some few ideas on three main areas on which this approach can be useful to. So the growing incorporation of digital dimension into the physical one in cultural heritage, especially monuments and memorial, as we will see, the investigation of digital memorial practices, and also the digital solution for controversial monument, as we see this morning in several papers, which is an important topic today at both public and academic level. When we speak about digital and physical heritage, actually Tallinn has a very interesting example. This is the victim of communist memorial about a few kilometers out from the city center of Tallinn. It's a landscape memorial built in 2018 for the 100th anniversary of Republic of Estonia. It has three parts, actually. The first is a typical memorial corridor that represent, you know, a trajectory of dark ages that Estonia has to be through before going into, you know, what is Estonia today: a free space, an open plaza made of natural elements, with also some text that explain the story and create a learning opportunity for the people. The third part of it, though, is a digital memorial, and that's okay. It exists many before as well, right? But on the other hand, this is peculiar because it has a social dimension of it, because everyone not only can search for a victim of communism, but also can make an entry of a victim of communism. So if you know an Estonian that was a victim of communism between 1940 and 1991, then you can make this entry that will be checked by the Estonian Institute of Historical Memory. And if then it's recognized that your entry is adequate, then it will be added not only in the digital memorial, but also on the physical memorial in this wall, and typical wall of memory. So this is a way that I think is unique in the world, where the physical and the digital interact at the same time. The second area is the kind of digital memorial practices that can become also to the example of the like that I just presented. Other examples are, for example, the 9/11 memorial in the US, where, for example, you have some interactive timelines on on a website where you can see again the attack of the 9/11, but also in the actual museum of the memorial, you have this wall of faces representing the victims of the 9/11, and in the screen you actually can access the information and the personal stories of all the people that create a sort of narrative. So you don't see those people as only victims, as only numbers, but actually you engage with the story of their life. They speak about their past, of what they were doing in their life and the day of the attack. There's also some other kind of more, let's call it grassroots, even if it's somehow institutional, example where everyone platform, where everyone can access and make actually a sort of memorial like digitalmemorial.it. And then it comes to the third area of investigation that this approach can be interesting in the digital solution for controversial heritage. That was actually my main research topic together with the digital solution for it. And we see in the past few days some example, even if we are between digital and the physical. Digital projection is for sure an example that is interesting. For example, during the Black Lives Matter movement protests, protesters actually projected the images of the face of Afro-American people on the pedestals of Confederate monuments, in a way reclaiming somehow this important space for their memorial needs. There's also interesting approaches to augmented and virtual reality. Now I will show you